Marcus Thompson woke up at 5:30 in the morning, just like he had done every day for the past 3 years. He lived in a small apartment above a bakery in downtown. The smell of fresh bread always greeted him when he opened his eyes. Marcus was 28 years old and worked as a royal guard at the city courthouse. His job was to stand at attention during important court cases and make sure everything stayed peaceful and orderly. Marcus had short brown hair and kind brown eyes. He was tall and strong from his time in the military before becoming a guard. People always said he looked trustworthy and reliable. Marcus took great pride in his uniform, which was dark blue with shiny gold buttons. He polished those buttons every single night before going to bed. His black boots were always spotless, and his hat sat perfectly straight on his head. But there was one thing that made Marcus different from the other guards. Around his neck he wore a small silver cross on a thin chain. The cross was not very big and most people barely noticed it. Marcus kept it tucked inside his shirt most of the time. This cross had belonged to his grandfather, who had been a soldier in 2 different wars. When his grandfather died 5 years ago, he gave the cross to Marcus and told him to always wear it for protection and strength. Marcus loved his grandfather more than anyone in the world. The old man had raised Marcus after his parents died in a car accident when Marcus was just 12 years old. His grandfather taught him about right and wrong and always told him to stand up for what he believed in. The cross reminded Marcus of all those important lessons every single day. On this particular Tuesday morning in September, Marcus got dressed in his uniform just like always. He made sure his cross was safely tucked under his shirt. Then he walked the 6 blocks to the courthouse where he worked. The building was huge and made of white stone with tall columns in front. Marcus always felt proud when he walked up those steps, knowing he was part of something important. The courthouse was already busy when Marcus arrived at 7 o'clock. Lawyers in expensive suits were walking around carrying briefcases. People who had to appear in court looked nervous and worried. Court clerks were organizing papers and getting ready for the day ahead. Marcus nodded politely to everyone he passed. He was known for being friendly and respectful to all the people who worked in the building. Marcus went to the security office to check in for his shift. His supervisor told him he would be working in courtroom number 3 today. This was where Judge Harrison Williams held court. Judge Williams was famous throughout the city for being very strict and demanding. He expected everything in his courtroom to be perfect at all times. Some lawyers were actually afraid of appearing before Judge Williams because he was so tough. Marcus had worked in Judge Williams' courtroom many times before. The judge was older with gray hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to notice everything. He wore black robes and spoke in a deep, serious voice. Marcus had always done his job well in that courtroom and never had any problems with the judge. As Marcus walked toward courtroom number 3, he had no idea that this day would be completely different from any other day. He did not know that his small silver cross would soon cause the biggest challenge of his entire life. Marcus simply thought he was going to stand at his post and do his duty just like he had done hundreds of times before. The morning sun was shining through the tall windows of the courthouse. Marcus felt good as he took his position by the courtroom door. He stood straight and tall with his hands clasped behind his back. His cross was hidden safely under his uniform shirt. Everything seemed normal and peaceful. But Judge Williams was already in his chambers preparing for the day ahead. Soon he would notice something that would change both of their lives forever. Judge Harrison Williams entered courtroom number 3 at exactly 8:30 in the morning. He was 62 years old and had been a judge for over 20 years. Everyone in the legal community knew him as a man who paid attention to every tiny detail. His courtroom was his kingdom, and he ruled it with an iron fist. Nothing escaped his notice, and he expected absolute perfection from everyone who entered his domain. The judge had gray hair that was always perfectly combed. His black robes were pressed and spotless. He wore small wire glasses that made his blue eyes look even sharper. When Judge Williams looked at someone, they felt like he could see right through them. He had a way of making people nervous just by staring at them for a few seconds. Marcus stood at his usual position near the back door of the courtroom. He had been standing there for about an hour already. The morning cases were proceeding smoothly. Lawyers were presenting their arguments, and the judge was listening carefully to every word. Marcus kept his eyes straight ahead and remained perfectly still as he had been trained to do. During the first case of the day, Judge Williams was reviewing some legal documents when something caught his eye. The morning sunlight was streaming through the tall windows of the courtroom. The light hit Marcus in just the right way, and the judge could see a faint outline of something under the guard's uniform shirt. Judge Williams squinted his eyes and looked more carefully. There was definitely something there hanging around the guard's neck. The judge had an excellent memory, and he remembered seeing this same guard many times before. But today something was different. The light was hitting at just the right angle to reveal what had been hidden. Judge Williams felt his jaw tighten as he realized what he was seeing. It appeared to be some kind of jewelry or pendant worn underneath the official uniform. Judge Williams believed very strongly in the separation of church and state. He had spent his entire career making sure that his courtroom remained completely neutral when it came to religion. No religious symbols were allowed anywhere in his courtroom. No religious references were permitted during legal proceedings. The judge felt this was essential to maintaining fairness and justice for all people regardless of their personal beliefs. When the first case ended, Judge Williams called for a 15-minute recess. This was unusual because he normally did not take breaks between morning cases. The lawyers and court staff looked surprised but quickly gathered their papers and stepped outside. Marcus remained at his post, as he was supposed to do during short breaks. Judge Williams stood up from his chair behind the big wooden bench. He walked down the steps slowly with his black robes flowing behind him. His footsteps echoed in the now empty courtroom. Marcus could hear the judge approaching, but he kept looking straight ahead as he had been trained to do. His heart started beating a little faster, but he tried to stay calm. The judge stopped directly in front of Marcus. He was close enough that Marcus could smell his coffee breath and expensive cologne. Judge Williams stood there for a long moment just staring at the young guard. The silence in the courtroom felt heavy and uncomfortable. Marcus could feel sweat starting to form on his forehead, but he did not move a muscle. Finally, Judge Williams spoke in his deep, serious voice. He told Marcus that he had noticed something around his neck underneath his uniform shirt. The judge asked if Marcus was wearing some kind of jewelry or pendant. Marcus answered honestly that yes, he was wearing a small cross that had belonged to his grandfather. Judge Williams' face became very stern, and his eyes grew cold. He explained that religious symbols were absolutely forbidden in his courtroom. Marcus arrived at the courthouse the next morning with his grandfather's cross still hanging around his neck. He had spent the entire night thinking about what Judge Williams had told him. The judge's words kept playing over and over in his mind. Marcus understood that he was taking a big risk by keeping the cross on, but he could not bring himself to remove it. The small silver piece meant too much to him. As Marcus walked through the courthouse hallways that morning, he noticed that people were looking at him differently. Word had spread quickly about his conversation with Judge Williams the day before. Court clerks whispered to each other when they saw him pass by. Some of the other guards shook their heads in disapproval. They thought Marcus was making a big mistake by challenging such a powerful judge. Marcus took his position in courtroom number 3 at exactly 8 o'clock. He stood straight and tall just like always. But today felt different. There was tension in the air that everyone could feel. The lawyers who were preparing for their cases seemed nervous. Even the court reporter kept glancing toward Marcus with worried eyes. Judge Williams entered the courtroom at his usual time. He wore his black robes and carried himself with the same authority as always. But when his eyes fell on Marcus, his expression became very serious. The judge could clearly see the outline of the cross under Marcus's uniform shirt. His jaw tightened and his eyes grew cold with anger. The first case of the day began normally. A lawyer was presenting arguments about a contract dispute. Judge Williams listened and asked questions just like he always did. But everyone in the courtroom could feel the tension building. It was like waiting for a storm to hit. Marcus kept his eyes forward and tried to focus on doing his job properly. After about 30 minutes, Judge Williams suddenly stopped the lawyer in the middle of his sentence. The courtroom fell completely silent. Everyone turned to look at the judge, who was staring directly at Marcus. The silence lasted for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. Judge Williams spoke in a voice that was loud enough for everyone in the courtroom to hear clearly. He said that Guard Thompson was in contempt of court for disobeying a direct order from the bench. The judge explained that he had specifically instructed Marcus to remove his religious jewelry, and that Marcus had chosen to ignore this instruction. Marcus felt his heart start pounding in his chest. He had known this moment might come, but it was still shocking to hear the judge's words. Everyone in the courtroom was staring at him now. Some people looked surprised, while others seemed to feel sorry for him. The lawyers sat frozen in their chairs, not knowing what to do. Judge Williams continued speaking in his stern voice. He said that contempt of court was a serious offense that could not be ignored. The judge announced that he was fining Marcus $500 for his disobedience. This was a huge amount of money for Marcus, who only made about $1,500 per month as a guard. The courtroom remained completely silent as Judge Williams finished speaking. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. $500 was more than 1/3 of his monthly salary. He would have to work extra shifts and skip meals to pay such a large fine. But something strange happened to Marcus in that moment. Instead of feeling defeated or scared, he felt something else growing inside him. It was anger, but also determination. Marcus realized that what was happening was not right or fair. That evening, Marcus went home to his small apartment feeling angry and confused. $500 was a lot of money for him to lose, but something inside him refused to just accept what had happened. As he sat at his kitchen table eating a simple dinner of bread and soup, Marcus made a decision that would change his life forever. He decided he was not going to pay the fine without a fight. Marcus had never studied law before in his life. He had finished high school and served in the military for 4 years before becoming a guard. But that night, he walked to the public library, which stayed open until 9 o'clock. The librarian was surprised to see the courthouse guard looking through the law section. Marcus asked her where he could find books about constitutional rights and religious freedom. The librarian showed Marcus to a section filled with thick books about law and government. The books looked scary and complicated with their big words and tiny print. But Marcus was determined to understand what his rights were. He checked out 5 books and carried them home in a heavy bag. His neighbors thought it was strange to see the guard carrying so many law books. Marcus stayed up until 3 in the morning reading about the First Amendment to the Constitution. This amendment protected people's right to practice their religion freely. Marcus learned that the government could not force people to hide their religious beliefs in most situations. He read about many court cases where people had fought for their right to wear religious symbols at work. The next day, Marcus called in sick to work. He spent the entire day reading and taking notes. His small kitchen table was covered with open books and pieces of paper covered in his handwriting. Marcus learned about something called the separation of church and state. He discovered that this rule was supposed to keep the government from forcing religion on people, but it was not supposed to stop people from expressing their own beliefs. Marcus read about a case where a teacher was allowed to wear a small cross necklace to work. He found another case about a police officer who could keep a religious pin on his uniform. These cases gave Marcus hope that maybe he had been treated unfairly by Judge Williams. Maybe the judge had made a mistake about what the law actually said. For 3 days, Marcus hardly left his apartment except to buy food. He read law books during the day and studied court cases at night. His eyes were red and tired from reading so much small print. His back hurt from sitting at the kitchen table for so many hours. But Marcus felt like he was learning something important and powerful. Marcus began to understand that the law was like a big puzzle with many pieces. Each court case was one piece of the puzzle. When you put enough pieces together, you could see the bigger picture. Marcus started to see that his situation was similar to many other cases, where people had won the right to wear religious symbols at work. On Friday evening, Marcus sat back in his chair and looked at all the books and papers spread around his apartment. He had filled 3 notebooks with information about religious freedom cases. He had learned about constitutional law and civil rights. Marcus felt ready to challenge Judge Williams in court. But Marcus knew he would be fighting against someone with 20 years of legal experience. Judge Williams had gone to law school and knew much more about the legal system than Marcus did. It would be like a mouse challenging a lion to a fight. 2 weeks later, Marcus walked into the courthouse carrying a black briefcase that he had bought at a thrift store for $10. Inside the briefcase were all his notes and copies of legal cases that supported his argument. Marcus wore his best dark suit, which he had borrowed from his neighbor. His hands were shaking a little bit, but his mind was clear and focused on what he needed to do. Word had spread throughout the courthouse about the guard who was going to represent himself against Judge Williams. Many lawyers thought Marcus was crazy for trying to fight such an experienced judge without proper legal training. Some court clerks felt sorry for him and thought he was about to embarrass himself badly. Others were curious to see what would happen when an ordinary person tried to challenge the legal system. The hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning in courtroom number 5. This was a smaller courtroom than where Marcus usually worked. When he arrived, he was surprised to see that every seat was filled with people. There were lawyers who had come to watch the unusual case. Court reporters from other floors had taken their lunch breaks early to see the show. Even some judges had quietly slipped in to observe what was happening. Marcus sat at the defendant's table feeling very nervous. His mouth was dry, and his palms were sweaty. He had practiced his speech many times in front of his bathroom mirror, but this was completely different. All these important people were staring at him and waiting to see if he would succeed or fail miserably. Judge Williams entered the courtroom wearing his black robes as always. But today he was not the judge hearing the case. Instead, Judge Margaret Chen would be deciding Marcus's fate. Judge Chen was known for being fair and patient with people who represented themselves in court. She was younger than Judge Williams, with short black hair and kind eyes behind her glasses. Judge Chen called the hearing to order and asked Marcus to present his case. Marcus stood up slowly and walked to the podium in front of the judge's bench. He could feel everyone's eyes watching his every move. His heart was beating so fast, he thought people might be able to hear it. But when Marcus began to speak, something amazing happened. All the nervousness seemed to melt away from Marcus's body. His voice became strong and clear as he began to explain his argument. Marcus told Judge Chen about his grandfather, who had worn the cross through 2 wars. He explained how the cross represented his personal faith and family history. Marcus said that wearing the cross had never interfered with his ability to do his job as a guard. Then Marcus began to talk about the legal cases he had studied. He mentioned a case called Tinker versus Des Moines, where students were allowed to wear armbands to school to express their beliefs. He talked about another case involving a postal worker who could wear religious jewelry while delivering mail. Marcus explained that government employees did not give up their constitutional rights just because they worked for the government. Judge Chen listened carefully to everything Marcus said. She asked him several questions about the cases he had mentioned. Marcus answered each question clearly and confidently. He had studied these cases so carefully that he knew them by heart. The audience in the courtroom began to murmur quietly among themselves. They were impressed by how well Marcus was presenting his argument. As Marcus continued speaking, his confidence grew stronger with each word. He pulled out a thick folder from his briefcase and began reading from a Supreme Court case called Goldman versus Weinberger. Marcus explained that this case involved a military officer who wanted to wear a religious hat while in uniform. Even though the military had very strict dress codes, the court had to balance religious freedom against government rules. Judge Chen leaned forward in her chair, looking very interested in what Marcus was saying. She had been a judge for 8 years and had seen many lawyers present cases, but she was impressed by how well Marcus had prepared his argument. Most people who represented themselves in court did not understand legal principles this clearly. Marcus was speaking like someone who had studied law for years. Marcus then talked about another important case called West Virginia versus Barnett. This case said that the government could not force people to act against their religious beliefs. Marcus explained that forcing him to remove his cross was the same as forcing him to hide his faith. He said this violated the First Amendment, which protected both freedom of religion and freedom of speech. The lawyers sitting in the audience were whispering to each other about how surprised they were by Marcus's presentation. One older lawyer named Mr. Peterson had been practicing law for 30 years. He had never seen someone without legal training present such a well-organized argument. Mr. Peterson began taking notes on what Marcus was saying because he thought other lawyers could learn from this presentation. Marcus pulled out another document and began reading from a case called Sherbert versus Werner. This case established that the government needed a very good reason before it could limit someone's religious practices. Marcus argued that Judge Williams had not shown any good reason why a small cross hidden under his uniform would cause problems in the courtroom. No one had ever complained about the cross before, and it had never disrupted any legal proceedings. Judge Chen asked Marcus a difficult question about whether his job as a government employee changed his constitutional rights. This was exactly the kind of question that could have confused someone without legal training. But Marcus had studied this issue very carefully during his weeks of preparation. He answered that government employees kept their basic constitutional rights even while at work. He mentioned a case called Pickering versus Board of Education, which protected government workers' right to free speech. Marcus then made an argument that impressed everyone in the courtroom. He said that the courthouse was supposed to be a place where constitutional rights were protected, not where they were taken away. He argued that if a guard could not wear a small religious symbol, then the courthouse was sending the wrong message about religious freedom. Marcus said the court should be setting a good example by respecting people's constitutional rights. The audience was completely quiet as they listened to Marcus speak. Even Judge Williams, who was sitting in the back row, looked surprised by the quality of the legal arguments being presented. He had expected Marcus to give up and pay the fine. Instead, he was watching a masterful presentation about constitutional law from someone he had dismissed as just a simple guard. Marcus talked for almost an hour, presenting case after case that supported his position. He quoted famous judges and legal scholars. He explained complex constitutional principles in simple language that everyone could understand. By the time Marcus finished speaking, the entire courtroom knew they had witnessed something very special and unusual. Judge Chen sat quietly for several minutes after Marcus finished his presentation. She was looking through her own legal books and thinking carefully about everything she had just heard. The courtroom remained completely silent as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Marcus stood at the podium, feeling both exhausted and proud of what he had accomplished. Finally, Judge Chen looked up and began asking Marcus more questions. But these were not the kind of questions meant to trip him up or make him look foolish. Instead, they were the type of thoughtful questions that one legal expert might ask another. Judge Chen wanted to explore some of the finer points of the constitutional issues that Marcus had raised. Judge Chen asked Marcus about the difference between government endorsement of religion and individual religious expression. This was a very complex legal concept that even experienced lawyers sometimes struggle to explain clearly. Marcus thought for a moment and then gave an answer that showed he truly understood the issue. He said that when he wore his cross, he was not speaking for the government or the court system. He was simply expressing his own personal beliefs, which the Constitution protected. The judge then asked about potential conflicts between religious freedom and workplace rules. Marcus answered that religious freedom was one of the most important rights in the Constitution. He said that employers, including the government, needed very strong reasons before they could limit this freedom. Marcus explained that a small cross worn under his uniform did not interfere with his job duties or create any real problems for anyone. Judge Williams, who was still sitting in the back of the courtroom, found himself in a very uncomfortable position. He had expected this hearing to be over quickly, with Marcus losing badly and learning his lesson about challenging authority. Instead, he was watching Marcus demonstrate legal knowledge that impressed even experienced judges and lawyers. Judge Williams began to feel something he had not expected. He was starting to respect Marcus and his dedication to fighting for his constitutional rights. The judge realized that Marcus had spent weeks studying law books and preparing his case with the same care that professional lawyers used. Judge Williams had to admit that Marcus's arguments were well-researched and intelligently presented. But Judge Williams also felt conflicted about the situation. He had built his reputation on maintaining strict order in his courtroom. He believed strongly that rules should be followed without exception. Judge Williams worried that if Marcus won this case, it might encourage other people to challenge his authority. He was concerned that his courtroom might become less disciplined and orderly. At the same time, Judge Williams was beginning to question whether his original decision had been fair. He had not given Marcus a chance to explain the importance of the cross or to discuss his constitutional rights. Judge Williams had simply issued an order and expected it to be obeyed without question. Now he was seeing that the issue was much more complicated than he had originally thought. Judge Chen continued asking Marcus questions for another 30 minutes. Each time Marcus gave thoughtful and well-reasoned answers that demonstrated his deep understanding of constitutional law. The other lawyers in the courtroom were amazed by what they were witnessing. Several of them were quietly discussing whether they should offer Marcus a job at their law firms. Marcus answered every question with confidence and clarity. He never seemed confused or uncertain about the legal principles involved. It was clear that his weeks of intensive study had given him a solid foundation in constitutional law that rivaled what many lawyers learned in law school. Judge Chen announced that she needed to take a 30-minute break to review all the legal arguments and make her decision. The courtroom slowly emptied as people went to get coffee and discuss what they had just witnessed. Marcus sat alone at the defendant's table, feeling nervous about what would happen next. He had done his best, but he knew that even good arguments did not always win in court. Several lawyers approached Marcus during the break to congratulate him on his presentation. Mr. Peterson, the older lawyer, told Marcus that he had never seen anyone represent themselves so professionally. A young female lawyer named Sarah Martinez said that Marcus had presented his case better than many attorneys she had seen in court. These compliments made Marcus feel good, but he was still worried about the judge's decision. Judge Williams remained in his seat at the back of the courtroom during the entire break. He was deep in thought about everything that had happened. The judge realized that he had seriously underestimated Marcus's intelligence and determination. He had also begun to question whether his original ruling about the cross had been legally correct. Judge Williams found himself hoping that Judge Chen would rule in Marcus's favor. When everyone returned to the courtroom, Judge Chen looked very serious as she prepared to announce her decision. The room was completely quiet as people waited to hear what she would say. Marcus felt his heart beating fast in his chest. His entire future seemed to depend on the next few words that would come from the judge's mouth. Judge Chen began by praising Marcus for the quality of his legal research and presentation. She said that in her 8 years as a judge she had rarely seen such thorough preparation from anyone, including experienced lawyers. The judge said that Marcus had demonstrated a clear understanding of constitutional law that was truly impressive for someone without formal legal training. Then Judge Chen addressed the main issue in the case. She said that after careful consideration of all the legal arguments, she had concluded that Marcus's constitutional rights had indeed been violated. The judge explained that wearing a small religious symbol under his uniform was protected by the First Amendment. She said that the government needed much stronger reasons than had been presented to justify limiting Marcus's religious freedom. Judge Chen announced that she was overturning the contempt citation and canceling the $500 fine. She ruled that Marcus had the legal right to continue wearing his grandfather's cross while performing his duties as a courthouse guard. The judge said that religious freedom was too important to be restricted without very compelling reasons that had not been shown in this case. The courtroom erupted in applause as soon as Judge Chen finished speaking. Many people stood up and clapped loudly to show their approval of the decision. Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes as he realized that he had actually won his case against the legal system. All his weeks of study and preparation had paid off in the most amazing way possible. Judge Williams stood up from his seat in the back and began walking toward the front of the courtroom. Everyone watched as he approached Marcus, who was still sitting at the defendant's table trying to process what had just happened. The older judge extended his hand to Marcus, with a look of genuine respect and admiration on his face. Judge Williams told Marcus that he owed him an apology for not handling the original situation more fairly. He said that Marcus had shown remarkable dedication and intelligence in preparing his case. 3 weeks after the hearing, Marcus was working his regular shift as a courthouse guard when something unexpected happened. A well-dressed woman approached him during his lunch break and introduced herself as Dean Patricia Rodriguez from the State University Law School. She told Marcus that she had heard about his case and was very impressed by his legal skills and dedication to justice. Dean Rodriguez explained that the law school had a special program for people who showed exceptional legal ability even without formal education. She offered Marcus a full scholarship to attend law school, including money for books and living expenses. Marcus could hardly believe what he was hearing. He had never imagined that his fight for his constitutional rights would lead to such an amazing opportunity. Marcus asked Dean Rodriguez why the law school would want someone like him who had never been to college. She smiled and told him that law schools needed people who truly understood what justice meant to ordinary citizens. She said that Marcus had shown more real understanding of constitutional law than many people who had studied it for years. The dean believed that Marcus would become an excellent lawyer who would fight for people's rights. That same week, Marcus received phone calls from 2 other law schools offering him scholarships. Word about the courthouse guard who had defeated a judge in a constitutional law case had spread throughout the legal community. Law professors were using Marcus's case as an example in their classes. Legal journals wanted to publish articles about his victory and what it meant for religious freedom rights. Judge Williams also did something that surprised everyone at the courthouse. He asked Marcus to meet with him in his chambers for a private conversation. When Marcus arrived, the judge thanked him for teaching him an important lesson about fairness and constitutional rights. Judge Williams admitted that he had been too quick to make his original ruling without considering Marcus's side of the story. The judge told Marcus that he had tremendous respect for the way Marcus had handled the entire situation. Judge Williams said that Marcus had shown more integrity and legal knowledge than many experienced lawyers. He offered to write letters of recommendation to help Marcus get into the best law schools in the country. The judge also said that he would be honored to serve as Marcus's mentor during his law school years. Marcus decided to accept the scholarship from State University Law School while continuing to work part-time as a courthouse guard. He wanted to keep his job so he could continue learning about the legal system from the inside. Marcus also wanted to help other people who might face similar situations with their constitutional rights being violated. During his first year of law school, Marcus became famous among his classmates for his deep understanding of constitutional law. His professors often asked him to share his thoughts about real-world applications of the legal principles they were studying. Marcus's case was now taught in law schools across the country as an example of how ordinary people could successfully defend their constitutional rights. Judge Williams kept his promise to mentor Marcus throughout law school. The 2 men met every month to discuss legal cases and constitutional issues. Their relationship had transformed from conflict to mutual respect and friendship. Judge Williams often told people that Marcus had made him a better judge by reminding him to always consider the human side of legal issues. Marcus graduated from law school 3 years later at the top of his class. He started his own law firm specializing in constitutional rights cases. His first client was another courthouse employee who was facing discrimination. Marcus never forgot the lesson that anyone could make a difference if they were willing to stand up for what was right and work hard to achieve their goals.